Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I am Michael Mamas, and we're coming to you from Mount Soma in western North Carolina mountains, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple. Today we're going to talk about life after death. What happens, It's interesting. I got a question on that. People send in their questions, I got a question on that. So I invited anybody else in I guess it was in a tweet that I did. And I've gotten tons of questions about life after death. So we'll go through them. One problem is, I could write books on this, there's just so much to talk about. But I think this will give at least a basic idea and an overview. And I think clarify a lot of questions and things that people may have. There's just so much, talk about it. And I'd like to put that in a more expanded context of what the ancient seers, the ancient masters would say about it. I think it's hard to talk about, to really give a deeper understanding of life after death and what happens. It really needs to be, to make sense, it really needs to be in the context of a bigger picture, And one analogy I like to use to give that understanding is the idea that there's only one thing, that's the unified field or the personified correlate. You could say pure consciousness, pure isness, God, and so you can, even right from the get-go, those are all just different ways of viewing the whole mechanic that gives you a better idea, I think, of life in general, but certainly what happens, life after death, what's that's all about. And the basic mechanic is that really there's only one thing. There's only consciousness. There's only pure isness. We are all one with God in that sense. And as many modern physicists, and certainly as the ancient seers said, that one underlying basis is pure consciousness, which equals pure isness. Isness equals consciousness, which you can think about that for a lot in and of itself. And from the spiritual perspective, we could say God's consciousness. From the perspective of physics, physicists studying the unified field. Many of them have said the more they study it, the more they realize all they're doing is talking about consciousness. That is the unified field, the one thing out of which all things are born. Okay? So consciousness in the whole mechanic, we got a Sri Yantra up here on the wall. That's a geometric representation of the mechanic of the manifestation of existence and the underlying structure. It's lively. You see, it upholds existence. A yantra is actually, the word translates into machine. It's a mechanic. So these yantra representations, like the picture on the wall there, is just kind of like a photograph of a living, functioning mechanism that underlies all existence. But the idea is it starts when consciousness becomes conscious of itself and perceives it as other. And that's Maya, because there is no other. It's just consciousness aware of itself and kind of does a double take. And so what happens then is that consciousness interacting with itself through this mechanic becomes dazzling. It's unbelievable what gets created. It's so exquisite. So what happens is the self, which is consciousness, the one thing that is who you are in your essential nature, what everything is in its essential nature. But when our consciousness gets lost to that dazzle, its own sense of its greater self becomes overshadowed. And so what happens is that we become immersed in the manifestation of existence, the manifestation of oneness, and kind of lose our touch with oneness. So we have a sense of it. I think we all feel on some level, some sense of, oh yeah, I'm one with everything, and oh yeah, there's something inside me that's precious and divine I need to protect. But really, it's not as solid or concrete as it could be. And I like to use the analogy then that it's almost like, you could compare like a drop of rain, you could say. There's the ocean of being, the ocean of oneness, the self-interacting dynamic of pure consciousness, unbounded ocean of pure consciousness. But what happens is then it manifests in the raindrops, you could say, and some of them fall on a mountaintop, just to use the analogy, and then they find their way back to oneness. But in the meantime, it's kind of like they're lost in the turbulence of the stream, the dynamism of life. Not necessarily a bad thing, because life is so exquisite, so overwhelmingly beautiful. But what happens is if we lose our connection, if our connection with the divinity becomes weakened, then we become distracted. We start acting in a manner that's not in total harmony with that unbounded ocean. Yet at the same time, we sense it and we're moving towards it. Everything you see gravitates back to that ocean of oneness. Every drop of rain finds its way to a stream and goes through all the turbulences or the quiet lakes and whatever, and eddy currents, choppy waters, smooth waters, and eventually comes back to that ocean of being. Okay, so that's the basic mechanic we're talking about. And what happens then when we drop the physical body? What happens when we die? I think it's also important, before we can even get into that, to say that in the original Bible, and that you don't have to take my word for it, I've heard it many places, I've talked to many biblical scholars just through the years, and I've been told this many times, so I searched it on Google before I did this podcast, and it's there, in the Bible, up until the time of Constantinople, Constantine, time of Constantine, up until that time, evidently reincarnation was in the Bible. But, well, who knows what the motivations are. You can read about different opinions on that. But at that time, they took the notion of reincarnation out of the Bible. So the idea then is that souls, when they're traveling down this stream, returning to the ocean of being, where they're truly, fully aware of their own true nature, which is one with God, one with the divine, the unified field, however you want to say it. We don't want to get caught up in opinions about perspectives or God or unified field, or some people are comfortable with one, some people are uncomfortable with it. So please give me some space here around this, because I'm trying to express this in a way that as many people as possible can relate to. Okay. So the idea then is we get caught up in this life. We get caught up in these identities, and we drop a physical body, and then there's a whole other thing we experience until we reincarnate into another physical body. And that process goes on and on and on until finally we kind of remember, reawaken to who it is and what it is we truly are, which is one with God, the unified field. It's good to look at it not just spiritually, but also from a perspective of this, the language of physics that was used by the ancient masters, this field of pure consciousness, this field of oneness. these different perspectives, if you can embrace them all together, one sheds light on the other. So somebody asked, one of the questions I was asked is, can we evolve? Do we continue to evolve after we drop the body and we're no longer in a physical body, but we're wherever we are, and we'll talk about where that is. And the answer to that question is yes, of course. But at the same time, being in a physical body is a much more powerful, generally speaking, a much more powerful mode of evolution. Why? Because evolution is all about integration of all the different levels of life, permeation of the surface of life with that transcendental depth, so that the relationship isn't some vague sense or what have you, but it's a direct communion. And life then lived, even on the surface of life, you're living in harmony with natural law. And we've talked about how what people think that means largely has to do with their preconceived notions, their identities, which oftentimes is where they get stuck and hold on to the surface of life. Using the stream analogy, we can get caught up in eddy currents as the water flows down. You know, some of the water can branch off the main flow of the stream and just kind of be spinning in a turbulent little circle for a while. And there are all kinds of distractions there, aren't there? It's almost limitless what those distractions are. I mean, look at the distractions in life. Look at what we get preoccupied with and what we believe in, our own belief systems, even our belief systems about God and spirituality, our laudable belief systems, as long as our desires and passions that are unhealthy, you know, all those things are eddy currents, you could say, that we get caught up in. But there's that force of nature that everything is gravitating back to oneness. And you see, that's one aspect of God's will, is the gravitational pull. God's will. Everything gravitates back to oneness. Everything gravitates back to God. But there's another facet of God's will, and that's just the laws of karma. You get caught up in an identity with something, there's a karmic return. And all the karma is what really slows us down. But now we might say, well, why then is there karma? Why do we have to do that? Well, if there's no karma, then everything naturally just gravitates back to oneness. The game is over, and we're all just sitting there in an unbounded ocean of oneness. But the manifestation of existence is upheld by karma, because that creates the whole field of polar opposites and this and that and thingness, you see? So that's why also there's a time lag between an action and a reaction. You know, you hear about, oh, you do something in one lifetime and you don't get the karma until another lifetime. Or you'll hear, you know, if there's such thing as karma, why these drug dealers that are getting all these children hooked on drugs or what have you, but they're living great lives, you know, a lot of money, and they're seem to be happy and stuff. How can that be? Where's the karma? Well, there's a time lag. Because if there was no time lag, karma would be resolved instantly. And if the karma was resolved instantly, there would be no field of duality. It would all just gravitate back to oneness and finished. So there's a beauty, you see, to the manifestation of existence, in that the wonders, the exquisiteness, the beauty that's inherent in the nature of pure isness, pure unboundedness, infinite divinity, is explored. It explores its own true nature. But the challenge becomes that we get lost to it. You see, and we get lost to the thingness and lose the greater context. We can conceive of that. Oh, okay, I get it. But getting it intellectually is very different from actually embodying it. You see, and people get stuck there because you see that all of a sudden you take an understanding of the nature of life and existence, and you get caught up in a eddy current, if you will, use that word again, of identity with your notions of what that understanding is all about. So the paradigm that gets created around the notion of the mechanics of creation becomes another place we can get stuck, you see. So yeah, we can evolve after we drop the body, but it's much faster when we have a physical body because we can become integrated. It's much more integrating because we're functioning on all levels of life simultaneously. What's the next question here? Can we help somebody? It says who died a bad death, or just a person that passed. Yes, we can, but it's a little bit of a delicate thing there because we can also hold them back. What do I mean by that? When a person drops the body, they can move on, and if they're holding on too tightly to the relative, their life before they drop the body, then that becomes an encumbrance to their progress to move forward. And so when it comes to our mourning the loss of a loved one, or in some cases, some religions really get into ancestor worship. Ancestor worship can actually clog up the mechanic. It just keeps them from, well, the typical analogy is, go to the light. Because they're kind of looking back over their shoulder at what was. That, and in extreme cases, that can even be the birth of things like spirits and ghosts and all that stuff. But to get on this idea, what does it mean to go to the light? Well, you see, in every individual, we have a sense of that divinity, a sense of that oneness, a sense of that beauty, a sense of heaven, the kingdom of heaven within, you see. And when we drop the physical body, and what are we talking about? We're talking about the transcendent, Chaitanya. We're talking about that one thing that underlies everything. We sense that. But when we drop the physical body, at first we can go into kind of this, call it an astral arena or a dream world or whatever you want to call it. And so then that transcendental value, our divine essence, if you will, is represented as or correlates to a light. And so we gravitate to that. But if we're pulled, by a distraction, we can resist that, which in a sense you could say is what we do when we're in a physical body. We resist it. But so that's where this idea of, go to the light, that's what that's all about. Is it true that when you die in fear, it multiplies 1,000-fold, or when you die happy, it multiplies 1,000-fold? Well, the moment of death is certainly pivotal. It's like, do you dive into the swimming pool with a belly smacker or a swan dive? All those angles of entrance have a major effect on how you do after you enter. And also, we could expand that to even say not just fear or happiness, but also addiction. For example, if you're addicted to cigarettes and you just can't stop smoking cigarettes, you need cigarettes, you need that cigarette, you need that cigarette. When you die, you still have that psychological addiction, but you can't smoke because there's no physical cigarette to smoke. And so it becomes a real, you could say that's a kind of a hell you would live with, maybe. But if you drop the body and it's beautiful and loved ones are around, or you're just feeling very lovingly towards life or God, or very content, then yeah, you just glide, right in. Now, having said that, there's another thing that the ancients said, that if when you die, you have the name of God on your lips, it's almost like then when you enter that ocean, it's almost like in that moment, that is heard and responded to. Um, but now this gets in, see all this stuff, again, these are lectures, this is a book, but the name of God, um, really in its purest form, it's the language of nature. It's not the language of man. And the idea there is that within the unified field itself, there's a structure of sound. There's a structure to sound. And all those different sounds have different meanings. And in a pure language, the name embodies the form. Whatever the name is, whatever the word is, inherent in that name is the very nature of the form itself. Direct correspondence, you see. And so, like that, then if you say a pure form of the name of God, for example, what are there some common ones from the Vedic perspective? Shiva, Vishnu, Lord Narayana, what have you. Now you got something there going with name and form. So the very name, the very word has more power. And so it's maybe you could say heard more fully by the attendants of that facet of God. There's only one God, but there are many facets, many faces. And so depending on which name of God you utter, you will gravitate naturally. You could say it poetically if you want to say the attendants of that face of God will come and take you to that heaven. What does that mean? They'll take you to that world that goes through the portal of entry into divinity through the kingdom of that name of God, that facet of God. And people may ask about Jesus. Well, that's a lot of people say when they die or they have a what do they call it, near-death experience, they see Jesus. Well, yeah, that's another portal. Now from the Christian perspective, you could say, well, all those are just different faces of Jesus. And I don't have a problem with that. From the Hindu perspective, you might say, well, all those different faces are just a face of Shiva. I don't have a problem with that. It's what I'm more interested in here is the understanding. And so in that way, when people say, well, Jesus is the only way, well, yeah, there's only one God, many faces, but only one God. And so I have no problem at all with that. There is only one, Here's a question. Oh boy, I'll skip that one. I'll get back to it. And it says, are we conscious after death, or is it more like a dream state? Well, that's very individual. The possibilities are as endless as they are when you incarnate. When you incarnate, you can be an accountant, or you could be poverty-stricken in Africa, or you could be, whatever. I mean, just the possibilities are endless. And it's the same when you drop the body. But there is a momentum to the mentality that were living when you're in a physical body. And so it's that momentum that when you enter gets kind of carried on for a while. And part of that momentum has to do with, heaven and hell. Because you can be that drug dealer I talked about, and you can rationalize away, oh yeah, well, if I didn't sell the kids the drugs, somebody else would sell it to them, or things like that. But deep inside, you know better. And once you drop the physical body, you get what you know you deserve. So in that sense, it's kind of like we create our own heaven or hell, The problem with saying that is a lot of people are just kind of arrogant. Oh yeah, I've got it figured out. Well, you may have a different opinion 5 seconds after you're dead. And then other people are kind of like, oh, I feel like I'm such a sinner and I've done so many things wrong. And so when they hear that, they're going to say, oh no, when I drop the body, I'm going to be in trouble, But quite commonly, it can be the opposite, The person that's so afraid of being a sinner is the good person, and the person that thinks they're so great tends to get what they deserve too, you know. So it's all a little tricky. But you know, they said that when Gandhi, if you saw the movie Gandhi, when Gandhi dropped the body, he said in the movie, he said, "Oh God," and that's supposed to mean you go to a very high heaven. But really, he didn't say "Oh God" in English. You know, he gave the Sanskrit word for God, which again is a pure language and has more oomph to it, more momentum to it, like that.
I was going to ask you if you meant that was like literal. Like, is that a state of being in death when you're calling out to God from somewhere inside, or is that the actual word?
I'm
or
saying
is that
right before you actually drop the body, if the name of God is on your lips, then that is, you're not hitting with a belly hit smacker, you're hitting with a swan dive, you know?
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, it is beautiful. It's really beautiful, you know? There's that question too of, do we see our loved ones when we drop the body? Well, that's definitely a possibility. And it depends on the nature of the connection and the nature of the love. But again, you know, in this world, people argue, and that's superficial. But there's a deeper connection, and really the connection with our immediate family, it's strong, you know? And so when you drop the body, that value will be there. And even connecting with people, you know, after they die, it's so much easier to do than you would think. Because if you just imagine that person, and even if you want guidance from that person, it's easy to do. And I think the best way to get past your psychology, is that really the person or anything? It's like, well, if my grandmother was here right now, what would she say? And then you can feel, I think of my grandmother, and I can still see the kitchen where I visit her in her house, and we visit, and her backyard, and even, I don't know, the smells and just of the food baking or what have you. And it brings you to a communion with that person's soul. And that's all very real. Now, somebody might say, well, is there attention on that? Are they thinking of you during that time, wherever they are up in heaven? Maybe, maybe not. But, and this is hard for people, but the reality is it doesn't matter, because what we're really talking about there is a superficial notion of their ego. Whereas you see, when you drop the body, unless you're, you know, caught up in smoking cigarettes or really hooked on the past and can't let it go, like I talked about, you become more unbounded. It's easy to become more unbounded when you don't have a physical body. You don't have to pay the rent next month. You know, you don't have all these superficial identities. And so it becomes kind of an expanded state, a more equanimous state. And then in that sense, a wiser state, a state where it's easy to be more spiritual, more reflective, provided you're not just hooked on worldly things, and you're sitting there looking for a cigarette and you can't get one, or even other things like, you know, even people that are, I don't know, sexually obsessive. There's a component to that that's just not psychologically healthy, and it becomes kind of like a swamp of distastefulness, you know. And so that's where you would go in the psyche, but concurrent with that, the resolution is not really there, other than to be in that swamp for a while And what are you doing there? You're working out karma. You're working out that karma by virtue of the fact that you just have to sit there in it and realize it for its true nature, what it really is, and eventually see past it, you see. Now and again, these things, it's not easy to talk about, especially in a little podcast. Because, somebody, well, you're saying, oh, that's so Victorian, and you're saying sex is bad. No, that's not what I'm saying. Or somebody else might say, well, sex is beautiful. What do you mean this slimy kind of thing? And there's truth to that too, So it all has to do with the psychological tones. And I guess what I'm saying is a lot of what happens to you after you drop the physical body has to do with the psychological tone that you cultivated and you created in your life when you're in the physical body. And that, by the way, is why it's really good to meditate. Because when you meditate, what's happening is daily, every day, twice a day, however often you meditate, that awareness is tapping into the light, the ocean of God, the ocean of being, the ocean of oneness, the ocean of the divine, and it becomes a habit. So when you drop the physical body, where do you go? The highest heaven, As far as the dispensing of the karma of these psychological tones that we're talking about, the personified correlate to that dispenser is called Yama. It's Lord Yama, the god of death. But if when you die, you have the name of God on your lips, you go right past Lord Yama and just go right to that high heaven. Or if you're a meditator and you die, even if you didn't happen to have the name of God on your lips, you gravitate to that lofty place and you're just going from mountaintop to mountaintop, and Lord Yama's down there in the valley watching you go right by, So that's the mechanic of the whole thing.
So, Michael, I had a question from a young 14-year-old. What's your day-to-day life like once you've crossed over? So I guess
that's a sweet question.
Yeah.
What's your day-to-day life like after you drop the body? It depends a lot, and it depends on the individual. Usually, and even among the very fine, wonderful people, there's a period of time there, where you're with your loved ones. You love your loved ones. You realize that you dropped the body, and so life there for a while can be that longing. I know a woman who dropped the body, and then I don't know if why I brought this up. Her child got into some trouble, and I was close with these people, and so honestly, I mean, it's just, I don't know why I brought it up, but this woman came to me after, and she was in a panic. She was like, go to my child and don't let this happen to them. They're moving in the wrong direction. You got to do something. But the thing is, there were no words. It was just panic. And I could tell it was a panic about their child. But I had no idea what the message was, And so for that woman, it was a period of worry and concern and love for her kids, and that kind of thing is not uncommon. After people, there's usually a short period of time there after somebody drops the body that there's still a connection to the earth plane, if you will, the earthly world that they left behind. And I think if people just get past their doubt, they experience the presence of those people. And even before a child is born, you can feel the presence of that soul. But see, here's the problem there. And even like past lives, even remembering past lives, we all have those recollections. But here's where we get in trouble with that is Is it our imagination, or is it truly a memory or an experience? And few people can tell the difference. And many people get caught up more in the imagination than the actual experience. But after, and it's a matter of discernment. After a while, you can feel a difference. You can, and as you get better at feeling the difference, you realize what's just imagination, or oh, I want to have this experience, and so you imagine it, versus the actual genuine experience. Yeah. Now another thing that can happen after, in like during the Civil War, people were getting blown out of their bodies on the battlefield, and when it first happened, they don't know what happened. They're just they don't even realize they're dead, and it takes them a while to figure it out. Times like that, there are other people that have incarnated or dropped the body, and they can come back to Earth at times like that just to gather souls. They'll put their arm around some dead soldier's spiritual body while their physical body's lying on the ground and say, hey, everything's cool. The body just died, but you'll be fine. And then they can even collect souls and go back up into heaven, if you want to put it that way, and talk about it, in a group, a personal process group kind of a thing. So all sorts of things like that are possible. Some people, when they drop the body, they just spend time transcending. They need a break. They need a rest. And that's what they get. They just close their eyes and they're just kind of in a meditative state while everything heals, kind of thing like that. So the possibilities of what you do are endless, but it's not the same as, you don't have a routine in the same sense, typically speaking, as, you get up in the morning and brush your teeth and, go have breakfast and then go. It's not like that. It's more, rarefied, I guess you'd say. Somebody asked a question about this enlightened city, and does that have an impact on what happens to a person when they die? Well, yeah. Your environment in general has influence on what happens after you drop the body. I mean, and really, if you think about it some and you get comfortable with this, it's common sense, isn't it? Yeah. Any other questions, you guys? Adrian or Scott?
Any questions?
I'm trying to think of.
I know Adrian. People send in a whole slew of them that Adrian has. But go ahead, Scott. You wanted to do?
You know how it's. I guess like it goes back to, do you see your family? But you see all the time where you're kind of running into people, and you have these connections or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because and then is that something that you see? Are you reincarnating back into Earth with?
I got it. With those people or in those relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not. It's kind of like birds flock, fish school. People, as they travel down that stream, if you drop the body, you tend to reincarnate in the same group. There's an affinity there. There's a connection there. And something that this is kind of tangential, but in a way it's not. Isn't it amazing that we have our little worlds, our group, and then we go to Walmart and there are all these different people that all have their own worlds, and they're all kind of there interacting or sharing that same space. But really those worlds don't coincide. We stay connected to our flock or our school or our our group. And that doesn't stop when we reincarnate. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be that we can't spend. It's possible that we spend an incarnation away and then reunite. But by and large, you bet, and that's not just true of loved ones, but it's even true of friends and associates, and people that were, particularly people that were close to you in life. And if that was a good relationship or a bad relationship, why? Because there's karma there. It can be good karma, it can be bad karma, what have you, but there's karma, and that karma tends to have a momentum to it, you see. So that, yeah, that's responsive, right, Scotty?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Here's a beautiful question. It says, when someone dies, do they or can they become an angel? Yeah, of course. Some people are celestial musicians, and when they reincarnate, they're great musicians on earth. They were probably celestial musicians because they were musicians before they dropped the body. And so there's a whole momentum there. So musicians can have a tendency to reincarnate as musicians and continue with that after they drop the body, you see, in one form or another.
Michael, one other thing, in preparation for the big event, is it meditate, just meditate, go, what's the best way to prep for the swan dive?
Meditate and live a good life. You see, a lot of people like to try to hear about their past lives, because then it tells them, they're hoping to hear about some great past life. And it's almost like they want to be able to rest on their laurels. Oh, in a past life, I was, some great person. And then they just go about living their life now, however they do. And so what I like to say to people, instead of trying to find out what a past life was where you were some great person, live your life now, so that in the next incarnation or down the line in an incarnation, if you hear about this life, this can be that life. This can be the lifetime you rest your laurels upon, That's what matters, Past lives, you can really get caught up in that, and admittedly, it's kind of cool, and people like to do it a little bit, but it's good at some point to kind of get over it,
You have a saying that you say in class sometimes: go out and be great this time.
Yeah, just go out and be great. Do something great. Be that kind of person that you wish you were in a past life. You be it in this life. That's right. These are a lot of nice little questions here. Do animals go to heaven? Well, sure. But, and anything is possible. It says in the Yoga Vashishta, it's even conceivable that there be such a thing as an enlightened mosquito. Don't count on it. But I mean, it might be an overstatement, but the idea is that as species evolve, they develop nervous systems that are capable of maintaining a fuller and fuller awareness of the totality of the grandeur of existence. And animals certainly can have a predisposition to, animals certainly have that capability to varying degrees, depending on the level of the evolution of their species and where they are in that species. Just like people, there are more evolved people, there are less evolved people. But so in their own form, you bet, animals can dream just like people, Yeah.
I had one question that someone wanted to know. What is heaven? What is heaven?
Yeah, heaven is the correlate to a state of divinity inherent in the awareness of the individual. Does that make sense? In other words, it's not. We could say it's a place you go to, and you could say that, but it might be better to say it's an awareness of a world that is created by virtue of the tonal quality of the nature of your own awareness. And that can be cultured also by virtue of the notions of God you had when you're in a physical body and you cultivate it. That's why some people, when they die, they go see Jesus. Other people, when they die, they go see Krishna, you see? But what sustains it is the level of refinement, the level of evolution of the individual's awareness. And then and see, at a certain state then, see, there's a question, sometimes people say, once you're enlightened, if you drop the body, do you come back? It's kind of a funny question because, you hear a lot of people say, oh, I don't want to have to come back here, But then when they hear, once you get enlightened, you won't come back, they say, oh no, kind of a contradiction there. But best to say that once you become enlightened, you have the option to come back if you want to. And more often than not, I almost want to say exclusively, but I won't say that. More often than not, the reason you would come back is to help. It's a little bit like you found this great gold mine, this wonderful gold mine that everybody's been searching for. And now you found it. Now you're in the kingdom of heaven. So what's the tendency? Look over your shoulder and say, hey, you guys, I found it. It's over this way. And so you may even incarnate into a body to say, hey, come on, wake up. It doesn't have to be like this, That's why most saints get stoned, by the way. A saint's never a saint in their own home, It's because they're not understood. People are lost into whatever dream it is they're in, and they're coming out there saying, hey, wake up, and people take offense to it in one sense or another. Who do you think you are? Or what do you think you know? Or, well, you're not living up to the expectations of my own identity, and so what makes you think you're, a spiritual teacher or enlightened or whatever, it's a mess, You would wonder how in the world could they find these guys that nailed Christ to a cross? And that's how, Was that responsive, or did I get off too much on a tangent?
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it was.
So Michael, could you say that, our job here is to try to refine ourselves to that and to be able to direct experience that thing here? So we can.
It would be nice if we viewed it as our job, because then we can expedite the process and alleviate the suffering, not only our suffering, but suffering of the world. But oftentimes, most people, even though they may hear that on Sunday afternoons at church and think it's beautiful, they go out and they live their life. And not many people really view it on an ongoing daily basis as their job. But nevertheless, they're still gravitating back. And so then they're learning their lessons, they're evolving, not by working at it through meditation or right action or whatever, but by just chipping away at the rough edges just through life's hard knocks. The way that's said in the Vedic and the perspective is there are two forms of the guru, of the teacher. There's Brihaspati, who's a benevolent giver of knowledge, and teaches people how to meditate and supports their evolution. And then there's Saturn, Shani, who delivers the karma, the hard knocks. Live your life wrong and he's going to straighten you out. But it'll be straightening by fire, you see, that kind of a thing. But it's really good if you can really get on to the idea that, yeah, our purpose and the best thing we can do for ourselves is to grow spiritually, to awaken to our own true nature, in other words. And a lot of that, and this is where a lot of people have a hard time, is getting past your preconceived notions of what that means, what that looks like, and how to go about it. And people really tend to be white knuckled on to emotional indulgence or preconceived notions and astral affinities, astral representations of God, which the ancient seers referred to that as like a vast and desertous wasteland, you know. So it's tricky, you know. It's highly elusive, traversing a razor's edge, the path of discernment. And discernment, you know, these things, somebody would say, well, I've been meditating 10 years, so I have discernment. Discernment is something that's cultivated through lifetimes. You know, the Buddhists say that if you were to take a fine veil and put it in the beak of a bird and have that bird fly over a mountaintop, and when it flew over the mountaintop, just that fine veil brushed the top of the mountain and knocked a few grains of dirt off the surface of the mountain. The number of times that bird would have to fly back and forth to make that mountain level, that's the number of incarnations a person has to go through. But there we're talking about incarnations. You wouldn't be listening to this podcast if you haven't pretty much gotten that mountain pretty darn smoothed out, you know. So the idea that I've been meditating 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, what have you, and therefore I'm spiritual and I've read the Veda and I understand all this and I can recite all this stuff and that means I'm spiritual. Nice beginning, all too often mistaken for the goal, you see. Questioner says, do you only live as a human on earth in past lives? Do you only live? I guess that means that, no, you can live, there are incarnations that an individual can have as another species. Generally, though, once you incarnate as a human, you come back as a human. But there are exceptions, and that is if you live a really lousy life, horrible life, they say it's conceivable to reincarnate as a chicken. And that we're talking really bad karma, you know. Or it's even possible to reincarnate as a monkey and ape. And if you've ever been around monkeys and apes, it kind of makes sense, you know. But by and large, humans reincarnate as humans, you know.
I think there was two meanings to that. One was, do you only kind of reincarnate as a human? And the other one was, do you only reincarnate on Earth? Are there other, I think you sort of addressed one. You could maybe have like a, what maybe we're addressing as a past life.
Well,
in helping the Civil War people, but what?
There's a spatial relationship to the different heavens. And some of the heavens in a spatial sense can exist on other planets, you know. But see, those things, talking that way can become more confusing or more misleading than instructive. But nevertheless, you want the answer, that's what they say. You know, that's what it is. You know, all those, you know, they talk about life on other planets. The whole universe is highly occupied. It may not be by solely by physical beings, though there are many, but also by celestial beings and all sorts of things. I mean, it's a world out there. You know?
Fascinating.
Yeah.
What's the purpose of? Oh, sorry, Scotty, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, how the Egyptians were obsessed with.
Oh yeah.
And
The Egyptian, the Egyptians are an interesting group. See, here's one thing that's important to understand about all ancient civilizations. If an ancient civilization was great, there was a reason it was great. And the reason it was great is because they had a lot of Shakti, a lot of power. Where does that kind of power come from? Living in harmony with natural law. So the ancient civilization, by virtue of the fact that it rose to such a high level, it had to have some connection with the depth. It's like no tree can grow mighty if its root system is bad. It's rooted in heaven, Mother Earth, and that's how it gets its strength. Same idea. But then the ancient civilization reaches a demise, and it reaches that for different reasons, and that's a whole other thing we can talk about sometime. But when it does that, then even the people at the tail end of that ancient civilization, after it's reached its demise, have lost touch with what made it so great in the first place. Why? Because if it didn't lose touch with it, it would still be great. And so now they even lost touch with it. And then we want to come on a couple thousand years later and look at that civilization through the eyes of the most recent past and their memory of what happened prior, and think we can understand that civilization better than the people at the tail end of that civilization did. Not an easy task, So it's better to understand the greater context. And then once you understand the greater context that was even lost in the tail end of those ancient civilizations, then you can look at those ancient civilizations from a more expanded perspective, a step back, and kind of understand it better. So the ancient Egyptians, in their heyday, when they were really doing great, they had an understanding of life and life after death and laws of nature, ancient technologies, how they built the pyramids, another lecture, and their relationship with life after death and things that could be done to create a great life after death. But the problem with that is at the tail end of that civilization, they started screwing it up. And they got some serious karma from that. And if you're going to do that kind of thing and you don't do it properly, you can really cast a soul into a living hell that goes on for a long time. And I don't even like to talk about it, but that's why it's important to really go into the depth of understanding of life, because the tail end of any spiritual understanding in a historical sense, when it reaches its demise, becomes astral. And the astral realm is a vast and desertous wasteland of heaven and hell. And you don't want to get stuck in that. And if I may say so, so many religions people are embracing them on a very astral level, and it just gets them into a lot of trouble. And I hate to make generalizations. It's really not fair, but I'll do it anyway. I've seen, not all, but a number of people, a number of Westerners who get into Hinduism get lost into the astral component of it. And that's a talk about left-handed versus right-handed Tantra. See, the Veda is basically, let's do an analogy. The Veda is like physics. It's the laws of nature. It's nature. That's what Veda is. It's nature. And they're laws of nature. And that's all expressed in the Vedic cognitions and the teachings of the ancient seers, which is what we're talking about. But then there's another thing which is called Tantra. Well, there are two kinds of Tantra. There's right-handed Tantra and there's left-handed Tantra. Right-handed Tantra is like engineering. You understand those laws of nature so that you can work with them in a constructive manner. Just like we work with the engineering of the laws of physics from a Western perspective and build electric lights and TV cameras and everything else. And that's constructive. But then there's left-handed Tantra, which it correlates to, I use the analogy in the West, you blow a fuse in the basement and you don't have another fuse. So what you do is you get a piece of aluminum foil and shove it in where the fuse is supposed to be. And all of a sudden the lights come back on. But the problem with that is you can burn the house down. And that's left-handed Tantra. You get instant results, and people are really tempted by that. And so a lot of people get, oh my God, I did this thing and it was so incredible. And I saw, Lord Krishna or whatever, and I'm talking to God or whatever. And everything's so beautiful and everything. And but it's left-handed Tantra. And the karma that comes back for left-handed Tantra is swift and painful. And what I mean by swift is it may take a number of years, but it's not to be messed with, And that's the problem with a lot of these different relationships with religions, particularly ancient religions, is you're looking at the tail end of that knowledge, be it Egyptian or whatever. You're hooking into the astral left-handed tantric once the knowledge got twisted, once the knowledge got lost, and you're embracing that, and you're seeing these incredible things and having these amazing experiences and think it's great. But man, you will pay, Anyway.
There was one others. What does this enlightened city that you keep talking about have as far as an impact on death? How does that impact death?
Well, I think I kind of talked about that a little bit, only in the sense that what I would say is that the environment you're living in when you drop the body has a lot to do with what happens after you drop the body, belly smacker or swan dive, And so being here, it's going to propel things forward, But having said that, I mean, there's a mechanic to the whole thing. And let's get off of Mount Soma for now, just because it's another point. Jesus, let's just take Jesus. Jesus was, the embodiment of the divine, Son of God. We can talk about what that means, but and look at the negativity he drew to himself, So there's a mechanic there too. There's in the Vedic literature, I forget who it was, there was some guy, some Rakshasa or something, who just hated Lord Krishna. Just really, really. And but when he died, he quickly attained enlightenment. Why? Because all he thought about his whole life was Lord Krishna. So I guess what I want to say is that there's a lot of funny things that can happen, and triple gainers with a back flip off the high knuckle board, But there was a great saint, and his motto, a great saint. I mean, they say he could perform all the siddhis, all the miracles, everything. And his motto was safety first. And that's why, especially when you're dealing with these powerful things, spiritual growth, these mantras, everything, it's powerful. And you don't want to mess with them. You want to use them carefully, respectfully, and you want to really be discerning about it. And that's really what we do at Mount Soma. I've had to have a number of people, I'll tell you, not be really a part of what we're doing here because they're off on these tangents and we just can't have it. Safety first. The pundits we have are full pundits, highly educated from 5 years old, very knowledgeable about the subtle mechanics of creation and the nature of life. And we go with that. We're discerning, Knowledge, when knowledge is pure and you're quiet with it and reflect and ponder, you know, the path of discernment. And discernment is something that's cultured, and it's cultured through lifetimes. And the process needs to be respected. That's why they call it a razor's edge. Easy to slip off one side or the other, and it's not just falling off into, you know, different forms of hell, but it's also being tempted by what appears to be glorious things, beautiful things, wonderful things, astral echoes of truth, perceived as truth, which hold truth at bay. You see? All right, I guess that's it, huh? Anything else, you guys?
No, I hope it's fascinating.
Okay. All right. I got so many questions, and I invited questions, and we got questions on a lot of different subjects. With everything that was going on in the world these days, you know, we've been talking about current events. I'll say one last thing in that context, and then we'll close. You know, it's interesting that the Chinese astrologers in China, then we got reports from Hong Kong, Taiwan, and they were all saying that this February 19th, or I'm sorry, February 10th date, February 19th is coming up. That was the date of my initiation into meditation, 50 years ago or something. February 10th was a time when all these planets coalesced together. They all came together. And all the Chinese astrologers and that were saying that at that point, then things are going to take off and really be a big boost forward. But looking at it, you know, all those planets crammed together, you could argue that's not a good thing, because there's just too much. It's like too many people living in too close quarters for too long period of time. They're going to end up arguing, you know. So at first, you know, I looked at that, and Puniji looked at that, and we were like, it doesn't make sense. And so, well, I wonder what they were thinking. And then the next day, Puniji looked at it, and he told me what he thought. I'm sure he's right. It just makes total sense. It's like if you have a bunch of springs, and you take those springs and you cram them all together, there's a tension there. And that tension correlates to the tension that we've been feeling in the world today from the phase transition that's happening. And they were crammed together to the ultimate degree on February 10th. After that, now they're being released. And that's a spring. It's a catapult. So we're going to see things starting to move forward even more dramatically in a positive direction than they have been. It's not going to be a total cakewalk. I mean, that's not what I mean to say, but it's gaining a boost. You see. Okay, I guess that's about it, and I'll talk to you again next time on Ancient Secrets Revealed.